The Case of Caylee Anthony. The summer of 2008 in Orlando, Florida was blistering, yet the heat couldn't compete with the rising tension in the Anthony household. In the quaint suburb where the family resided, the walls of their modest home concealed secrets that would soon unravel in a tale of unspeakable horror and suspense. Cindy Anthony had always been a doting grandmother, and her granddaughter, Caylee Anthony, was the apple of her eye. But in June of that year, Cindy's world began to crumble. Caylee had been missing for 31 days, and no one knew where she was. The bright 2-year-old girl, with her sparkling eyes and infectious laughter, had vanished without a trace. Cindy's daughter, Casey Anthony, had offered one excuse after another for Caylee's absence. From claiming she was with a nanny, Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, to stating she was on a trip with friends, Casey's stories were inconsistent and suspicious. On July 15, 2008, Cindy couldn't take it any longer. She dialed 911, her voice trembling with fear and frustration. "There's something wrong," Cindy cried. "I found my daughter's car today and it smells like there's been a dead body in the damn car." The police arrived at the Anthony home and immediately sensed that something was terribly wrong. Casey was taken in for questioning, her demeanor eerily calm. When asked about Caylee's whereabouts, she spun a tale about the nanny, Zenaida, having kidnapped her. But investigators found no evidence that this nanny had ever existed. As days turned into weeks, the search for Caylee became more desperate. Volunteers scoured the area, posters of the missing girl were plastered everywhere, and the media swarmed like vultures, sensing a story that would grip the nation. Casey's behavior grew increasingly erratic, and her lies began to unravel. She was arrested for child neglect, making false statements, and obstructing an investigation. In the midst of this turmoil, a chilling piece of evidence emerged. Forensic experts examined Casey's car and discovered traces of chloroform and a strand of hair that appeared to belong to Caylee. The horror deepened when they revealed that the hair showed signs of decomposition. The suspense grew unbearable. The public watched in morbid fascination as the trial of Casey Anthony unfolded. Prosecutors painted a grim picture of a mother who wanted to escape her responsibilities, who saw her daughter as an obstacle to her carefree lifestyle. They argued that Casey had used chloroform to render Caylee unconscious before suffocating her with duct tape. The defense countered with a shocking claim. Caylee had accidentally drowned in the family pool, and in a state of panic, Casey and her father, George Anthony, had covered up the death. George vehemently denied this accusation, adding another layer of complexity and suspicion to the case. During the trial, disturbing details came to light. Casey's friends testified about her partying lifestyle, even in the days following Caylee's disappearance. The infamous Bella Vita tattoo she got just 2 weeks after Caylee went missing seemed to mock the notion of a grieving mother. Casey's demeanor in the courtroom was unsettling, sometimes appearing detached, other times breaking down in tears. Then came the moment that sent shivers down the spines of everyone following the case. On December 11, 2008, a meter reader named Roy Kronk found a small skeleton in a wooded area near the Anthony home. The remains were confirmed to be Caylee's. The horror was now tangible, and the nation mourned the tragic end of an innocent life. "She was thrown away like trash," Cindy whispered, tears streaming down her face as she stood before a makeshift memorial for Caylee. "How could this happen to our sweet baby?" The trial culminated in a verdict that shocked the nation. On July 5, 2011, Casey Anthony was found not guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated manslaughter, and aggravated child abuse. She was convicted only of providing false information to law enforcement. The courtroom erupted in chaos, and outside, the public's outrage was palpable. Many believed that justice had not been served. Years have passed since the case of Caylee Anthony, but the story remains a haunting reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind closed doors. The unanswered questions and lingering suspicions continue to cast a shadow over the Anthony family. The case has become a part of the cultural fabric, a true crime saga that continues to captivate and terrify. In the quiet of the night, when the wind rustles through the trees and the moon casts eerie shadows, the name Caylee Anthony still whispers through the air, a chilling reminder of innocence lost and the unspeakable horrors that sometimes lie just beneath the surface of everyday life. The Enigma of the Dyatlov Pass incident. In the winter of 1959, 9 experienced hikers set out on an expedition in the Ural Mountains of Soviet Russia, seeking adventure and the thrill of conquering the unforgiving terrain. Led by Igor Dyatlov, the group comprised university students and graduates, all seasoned in outdoor survival. Their goal was to reach Otorten Mountain, a journey that promised challenges, but nothing they hadn't faced before. Little did they know, this expedition would plunge them into a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. The journey began on January 27th, a cold yet clear day. Spirits were high as the group trekked through the snow-covered landscape, documenting their progress with journals and photographs. By January 31st, they had reached the edge of a highland area, preparing for the ascent to Otorten. They established a base camp and cached surplus food and equipment to lighten their load for the climb. On February 1st, they started their ascent. As the day wore on, the weather turned for the worse. Heavy snowfall and strong winds reduced visibility, forcing the group off their planned route. They ended up on the slope of Kholat Shakal, which translates to Dead Mountain in the indigenous Mansi language. Deciding to set up camp on the exposed slope rather than move downhill to a forested area, they made their last recorded decision. What happened next is shrouded in mystery. When the hikers failed to return by February 12th, as expected, search efforts began. It wasn't until February 26th that rescuers found the group's abandoned and badly damaged tent on Kholat Shakal. The tent had been cut open from the inside, and all their belongings were left behind, including shoes, warm clothing, and other essentials. It was as if they had fled in a panic, half-dressed, into the freezing night. Yuri Yudin, the sole survivor who had turned back earlier due to illness, stood at the edge of the camp, pale and silent, as the rescuers relayed their grim discovery. "Why would they cut open the tent?" Yudin muttered, disbelief etched in his voice. Something must have terrified them. The search team, led by an experienced mountaineer named Captain Anatoly Ivanov, pressed on. They followed the tracks leading away from the tent, which were soon lost in the snow. 2 bodies were found at the forest edge, barefoot and dressed only in their undergarments, lying near the remnants of a small fire. Their hands were severely burned, as if they had desperately tried to keep warm. Further into the forest, the searchers found 3 more bodies, spaced at intervals, as if they had been attempting to return to the tent. Their causes of death were officially listed as hypothermia, yet their positions suggested they had succumbed to something far more sinister. Captain Ivanov examined the scene, his mind racing with questions. Why did they leave the tent in such a hurry? And why in their state of undress? He pondered aloud, looking at the battered and lifeless forms. It took 2 months to find the remaining 4 hikers. They were discovered buried under several meters of snow in a ravine 75 meters further into the woods. Their bodies told a different story, one of trauma and unexplained injuries. Lyudmila Dubinina, for instance, was missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her lips. Alexander Kolovatov had severe skull damage, and Nikolai Thibault Brignol had crushed ribs. Yet, there were no external wounds to explain the internal injuries, and the level of radiation on their clothes puzzled the investigators. Theories about the cause of their deaths range from natural disasters to military tests gone awry. Some suggested an avalanche or katabatic winds forced them out of the tent, but the lack of typical avalanche signs weakened this theory. Others speculated about secret Soviet military experiments, given the high levels of radiation found on some of the clothing. Local Mansi tribesmen were questioned but cleared of any involvement. Among the more chilling theories are those involving supernatural forces or extraterrestrial encounters. Some believe the hikers witnessed something they were not meant to see, something that drove them to flee in a blind panic. Yudin, haunted by survivors' guilt, couldn't shake the feeling that the true answer was beyond human comprehension. One evening, after the investigation had been officially closed, Yudin sat by a fire, lost in thought. He recalled the last night he spent with his friends, their laughter and camaraderie. "Igor, do you think we'll make it to Otorten?" he had asked. Dyatlov had smiled, his eyes gleaming with determination. "Of course, Yuri. We'll conquer that mountain and be back to tell the tale." But the tale that remained was one of horror and enigma, a story that would be whispered around campfires for generations. The Dyatlov Pass incident, as it came to be known, left more questions than answers. It is a chilling reminder of the unknown forces that can lurk in the wilderness, waiting to claim even the most prepared and courageous among us. The case of the Green River Killer. The fog rolled in thick and heavy over the Green River in Washington state, curling like ghostly fingers around the trees and casting eerie shadows in the moonlight. It was the early 1980s, and the residents of the Seattle area were gripped by a terror that was both invisible and omnipresent. It started with the discovery of a single body, then another, and another. By the time the media dubbed him the Green River Killer, the death toll had already begun to mount. Detective Sam Matthews stared at the murky waters, the weight of his duty pressing down on his shoulders. He had seen many horrors in his career, but nothing compared to this. "We've got another one, Sam," his partner, Detective Linda Parker, said, her voice tight with the strain of too many sleepless nights. "Where?" he asked, already dreading the answer. "Same place as the others, down by the river," she replied. "It's like he's taunting us." Sam and Linda made their way to the crime scene, their flashlights slicing through the fog. The sight that greeted them was both gruesome and heart-wrenching. The body of a young woman lay partially submerged in the water, her eyes staring lifelessly at the sky. There was a sense of unnatural stillness, as if even nature was horrified by the scene. "Same M.O., Linda said, her voice a mixture of anger and despair. "Strangled, left in the river. It's him again." Sam clenched his fists. "We've got to catch this monster, Linda, before more lives are lost." The Green River Killer was methodical and merciless. He preyed on vulnerable young women, many of whom were runaways or sex workers. His ability to blend into the background, to appear as an ordinary man, made him all the more terrifying. He was a ghost, a shadow that lurked just beyond the reach of the law. Weeks turned into months, and the killer's body count continued to rise. The detectives worked tirelessly, chasing down every lead, but the killer always seemed to be one step ahead. The public was growing restless, and the pressure on the police force was immense. The sense of fear and helplessness was palpable. One night, as Sam sat at his desk, staring at the endless piles of case files, Linda burst into the room, her eyes alight with a mixture of hope and urgency. "Sam, we got a break. A witness saw someone matching the description of one of our suspects near the river last night." "Who?" Sam asked, his heart pounding. "Gary Ridgway. We've had him on our radar, but never had enough to bring him in," Linda replied. "This might be our chance." The two detectives moved quickly, their determination renewed. They brought Ridgway in for questioning, and the atmosphere in the interrogation room was thick with tension. Sam leaned in, his eyes boring into Ridgway's. "Where were you last night, Gary?" Ridgway's face was a mask of calm. "Home. With my wife." Can anyone confirm that? Linda asked, her voice cold and precise. My wife can, Ridgway replied, his gaze never wavering. The detectives knew they needed more than just circumstantial evidence. They needed something concrete, something that would break the case wide open. Days turned into weeks, and the frustration grew. Ridgway was careful, too careful. Then, in a stroke of luck, a piece of evidence emerged that changed everything. DNA technology, still in its infancy, provided a crucial link. Semen samples collected from several of the victims were a match to Ridgway. It was the break they had been praying for. When Ridgway was confronted with the evidence, the mask of calm shattered. You don't understand, he said, his voice a mixture of defiance and desperation. They were just whores. No one cares about them. Sam's fury erupted. They were human beings, Gary. Someone's daughter, someone's sister. They mattered. The trial of Gary Ridgway was a media sensation. The courtroom was filled with the families of the victims, their faces etched with pain and longing for justice. Ridgway's confessions were chilling. He admitted to killing at least 71 women, though the true number might never be known. In a final, eerie twist, Ridgway led the authorities to the bodies of several more victims, buried in remote locations. As he pointed out the burial sites with a dispassionate detachment, the horror of his crimes became even more apparent. Gary Ridgway was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a small solace to the families who had lost so much. The Green River Killer's reign of terror was finally over, but the scars he left behind would never fully heal. As Sam and Linda stood by the Green River one last time, they felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. We got him, Sam, Linda said softly. Yeah, Sam replied, staring at the water, but it cost us so much. The fog began to lift, and for the first time in years, the Green River seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The nightmare was over, but the memory of the Green River Killer would haunt the area for generations to come.